Hi, this is Nahid. Welcome back as we continue our journey down in the needs level of the obstacles pyramid. To give you a quick review, remember that the core guiding question driving all of this is if we're smart and capable as human beings and we have the freedom to create any life we want for ourselves, why are so many people stuck and unhappy? There must be something in the way. And as I mentioned in the last video, often it's unmet needs that's at the core of it. The mission that I've had has been to clear the path to success for as many people as possible. In order to do that, I've had to deeply understand what gets in the way. And I built a model to help with that called the obstacles pyramid. We've already been through the top levels of the obstacles pyramid, which are easier for us to see in ourselves. So when we're stuck at the relationships level or at the systems level or at the clarity level, we can usually tell. And the tools that I've created at each of those levels are fairly practical. And a lot of people use tools that are similar to those tools. However, once we get to the needs level, we're almost crossing a bridge or taking our submarine deeper into the water where there's less light and it's less easy to see what's going on. This is the part of the journey that's really important, though, because needs tend to be the number one thing that gets in the way of our ability to create the life we want for ourselves. Getting our needs met is non-negotiable. It's our responsibility to learn to identify our unmet needs and get them met. This is always our first priority. If you go through your values workbook and you try to identify the things that are most important to you, your 6 core values, if you have unmet needs, your unmet needs will always come up to the top and look and feel like values because they have way more urgency than your values do. Your values are not unmet needs. They're the things that are important to you, and they show up when all your needs are met. So some people who never get their needs met always are working on needs instead of values, which isn't a bad thing. They need to be working on needs, but it's better to do it more consciously than subconsciously. Because even if we decide that we can't get a need met, and even if we decide to not prioritize it, our body will prioritize it for us, and in ways that are sometimes not as effective as if we did it directly. For example, sometimes when we're triggered, we react to something and then we regret our reaction, or other people see our reaction and think that we're childish. When we are not trying directly and consciously to get our needs met, the ways that our body tries to automatically get us into action are very emotional and reactive, and they tend not to work as well. But it's a rough system. It's not as sophisticated as the system that we would have available to us if we used all of our brain to try to get our needs met. Now, in order to get your needs met, you need to have a way to start. And a good way to start is to try to identify what your needs are. So when I started, I used the needs program that I got from the coaching school that I went to. And it was designed by Thomas Leonard, who is a leader, or who was at the time a leader in the field of coaching. And he designed a program called the Needless Program, which I was exposed to in my work at Coach U. The Needless program is kind of cool because it has a whole list of needs, and it has you go through this list of words. And if any of those words feel like they might be a need, or if you have this really weird emotional reaction like, oh, I don't want that to be a need, because remember, your needs are governed by your emotions, and some of those emotions are unpleasant, then you want to look at all of those things. So in the Needless program, you try to narrow your needs down to about 5 priorities, and then you go through a program. You ask yourself some questions. You start learning how you are empowered to get your needs met. You start understanding things that you could do to develop a system in the world to get your needs met. So I used this for a really long time, and I still use it. But since then, I've developed more tools. And one of the reasons that I started developing more tools is because I found that a lot of people would get really caught up in trying to find the right needs because there were so many words to choose from. And it turns out that you don't need to be very specific verbally about what your need is called. So whether it's appreciation or acknowledgement isn't really that significant. Any work that you do on getting your needs met will move you forward, whether you know the exact word or name of your unmet need or not. Because remember, unmet needs are pre-verbal. So the names and the words that you come up with to describe them, those are just labels you're putting on something. What we're really trying to respond to is the emotional system that's underneath the labels. So I moved on to other ways to get your needs identified. And the most powerful thing that I use now is a trigger log. What the trigger log does is it has you log anytime you feel triggered. Well, this is way more accurate because it's picking up on any time you're having one of those negative emotional reactions. And remember, all of your negative emotional reactions are signals that in that moment a need is not being met. The intro trigger log does not have a column that has anything to do with needs. And that's because when people first use this, they're usually still working at the top of the pyramid. It's still helpful for them to use this trigger log, but they're not actually thinking about unmet needs at that time. But once they do start thinking about unmet needs, I'll have people do a trigger log, and you'll see in the bottom table here, which is one in Excel because there's so many columns. At the end, you'll see a column that says potential unmet need with a question mark. So we start having people guessing what is the unmet need that's at play here once they've learned about unmet needs and they're also using the trigger log. So another thing that is important is what comes up for you when you think about what you need on the surface can be really obscure and hard to understand in terms of making a connection to something you need to survive, right? So let's say you have somebody who is, well, here, it looks like I'm using the cookies example here. So I'll use the cookies example. So a lot of times when I would react, what I was really doing is going and eating food. And I recognized at some point that that was a reaction because I wasn't feeling good. I was going and getting food, and I was going to get food to make myself feel better. But it wasn't the food I needed. So in my mind, all I could hear when I asked myself what I needed is, I need cookies right now. So what I had to do is do what we call the needs chain. And we say, and what would that get you? And what would that get you? And you ask yourself the question quite a few times in a row till you get to something that starts to look like a real survival need. So here is how this chain worked for me. My mind would just tell me I need cookies. So I say, well, what will the cookies do? Well, it will give me a break. I need a break and I need some joy right now. Well, and what would that get me? Getting a break and having some joy. Well, it would get me away from the pressure I'm feeling, kind of an escape from the pressure. Turns out I'm putting that pressure on myself. Well, why am I putting that pressure on myself? Well, what would that get me? It would protect me from feeling so horrible about being behind. Oh, what's the real trigger? I'm feeling behind. Now that's starting to sound a little bit more like a threat. What would that get me? I would feel more okay about myself. I need to feel accepted as I am. So what happens is I start getting behind in my work and I start feeling bad because I'm behind. That's my emotional trigger. Well, why am I starting to feel bad? Because I'm behind? Because if I'm behind and someone else is disappointed, I'm worried that they will stop loving me. They won't accept me anymore. So that's the emotional trigger. I don't experience it as, oh gosh, I have a need for love and acceptance right now, and I'm starting to feel unaccepted. No, I'm judging myself. And in judging myself, I'm making myself feel even less accepted, even if there's nobody around to express disappointment in me. And the way that I have learned to make myself feel better is to take a break from work and give myself something that tastes good so that I can kind of escape into a place where I'm feeling a little bit better and I'm escaping from the pressure. Not an effective behavioral strategy, by the way, but that's why we look at this, so that I can deal with this at the core level. So I'll follow this up with, well, how did I learn to deal with this and stop eating cookies when I was feeling pressured? What happened is once I got really in tune to the pattern that I had, which is putting a lot of pressure on myself, to never disappoint anybody, I tuned into the fact that I had a coping mechanism to try to make sure no one was ever disappointed in me. And that stemmed from not feeling that anybody would like me unless they were never disappointed with me. So then I was able to go in and really do the work, which is accepting myself 100% and trusting that other people would still like and accept me, whether I was perfect all the time or not. What a relief, I've got to tell you. And I was able to break the chain. So you may have a lot of behaviors like this, a lot of behaviors that you engage in that feel like self-sabotaging behaviors, and you don't really understand why you do them, but you can't stop doing them. And eating for a lot of people is one of them. And for me, it definitely is one of my main ones. But if you go through the needs chain, that's one way to identify what's really going on. And then if you deal with the source or what's really going on, you can make a real difference. I like to simplify unmet needs because what I found over my years in working with clients is that spending time trying to identify specific unmet needs isn't as powerful as actually doing work to get some of these broad categories of needs met, because we all have unmet needs in all of these categories. They come up at different times, they come up in different degrees, but we all have unmet needs in all of these categories. These unmet needs are like kind of holes in a dike. The more holes you have, the harder it is to keep those holes filled. When you do proactive work, what you're really doing is you're filling most of the holes of a dike, and you're developing like a stockpile of extra plaster or extra sand or concrete or whatever the dike's made of. And whenever a hole pops in the dike, you can fill it up really quick. So proactive work in all categories of needs is the 20% of needs work that gets you 80% of the results. So instead of spending too much time on identifying, we generally look at what are the main categories of unmet needs and how can I work to get my needs met in each of these categories. And a good example of that is at the safety level in our society, a lot of people have triggers around financial security. So we might do an exercise where you have to imagine that you've lost everything financially and you have to figure out how you'll survive. Doing that changes your perspective about what your resources are. So it teaches you that there are many ways that you could survive if you ran out of money. And then that settles some of the anxiety or the triggers that come up around money. Same thing with love and belonging. Turns out that often we have a voice in our head that's really mean to us. We call it our judge. And the way that judge treats us is very reflective of how other people treat us. So when we flood ourselves with self-love and work on the relationship that we have with ourselves, becoming more accepting of ourselves, becoming less ashamed of ourselves, surprise, surprise, our relationships with other people change as well. Other people tend to treat us the same way our judge treats us. So working on becoming less judgmental of ourselves and really flooding ourselves with self-empathy and compassion is one of the most powerful things that you can do to get your love and belonging needs met. It doesn't seem logical because you're looking for love out there from other people, but actually it's the number one thing you can do. Ultimately, identifying your unmet needs and working consciously to get them met, even though it's an ongoing self-discovery process, brings a new lightness and freedom every step of the way. This work leads to progressively less anxiety and frustration. So if you have a lot of anxiety and frustration or stress in your life, this is the number one primary work that is going to reduce your stress, is identifying your unmet needs and getting them met. This work leads to progressively more peace and confidence. And as a bonus, every bit of work you do on needs improves your relationships across the board, your personal relationships and your professional relationships. And that is because your relationships play off your emotions. And when you're stressed and triggered, that actually triggers other people. So when you're happy, that soothes other people. And it's important, especially if you're a parent, because when you're stressed, you're stressing out your kids. And when you're happy, you're making your kids feel safer and happier. So it's your job to get happy. So that's a good thing. Okay, in our next video, we're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to talk about what gets in the way of getting your needs met. because sometimes when you're on your journey to getting your needs met, you come to the conclusion that you can't get your needs met, but you can, and we'll show you how. See you then.